Hello and welcome back. Today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be making a planter that can go out on the porch in the spring. The plants we're going to be utilizing today will be plants that you can plant outside in your landscape once you're done with them. So the first plant I'm going to be using today is called a hellebore. So the hellebore here that I have is called Ice and Rose. It's actually a really beautiful one. I hope you can see the tag without too much glare. So it has very beautiful color to it, as you can see there, and the color varies. So some of them are a little lighter, some of them are a little darker, and this is actually going to form the center of our planter. Now this plant is hardy in zones 5 through 9. I garden in a zone 6A, and this is something that will winter here. Now, what will happen is in the winter, the leaves on this will remain evergreen and they'll lie flat to the ground as long as the temperatures are below freezing. These plants often will start to bloom as early as March or April in our zone. When they're blooming, the blooms will lie flat to the ground while the temperatures are below zero. Once the temperatures are above zero, they will stand up to this beautiful height. This particular variety will get anywhere from 12 to 24 inches. Now, when you're thinking of 12 to 24 inches, the first 12 inches are going to be its thick, leafy, and they have like jagged edges on them. They're actually quite, they can rub you and hurt if you rub up against them, these leaves. So these will be the first 12 inches of height. The following 12 inches will be these beautiful shoots of flowers. Okay, so this will be the center of our planter. Now this is a shade planter. Having said that, in early spring, March, April, you're not going to get a lot of sun anyways. Our daylight tends to be more limited. It's just sort of coming around and the temperatures aren't very intense. So this can work in a part shade area or an area that is covered, such as a front porch. So I'm going to begin by setting our centerpiece in. And once we're done that, I'm going to be underplanting with this beautiful heather. So heather, again, is a perennial in my area, and it makes a low ground cover that flowers in early spring. So once I'm done with these, they will make their way out into the landscape. Now heather does like cooler temperatures. It is hardy zones 5 through 7. So anyone outside of a zone 7 will struggle with heather. It's more like it will pass away in the extreme heat of summer. It does like to be kept into more of a part sun location, and it would like to be kept moist. These are great for things like rock gardens or little tiny areas that you would just like to have a ground cover for. Once they're done blooming, they have these really dark leaves to them that are tiny, almost like a little pine needle in terms of its shape or structure. So these flowers will come off and you'll be left with that. And these again are also evergreen, so they will retain their needles through the winter months. So I'm just going to start by taking my hellebore out. Now again, I'm just going to tease up the bottom in case any of the roots have come through the pot. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to squeeze the pot a little bit to try and loosen up the plant here. Oh, this one's in tight. So another trick when a plant is in tight is you can lay it down carefully on the ground, and you can actually press on the root ball and roll it ever so slightly. And what that'll do is that'll help loosen it up inside of the pot, because we don't want to tug too hard on the crown of the plant, being the structure that's growing above the soil. In a worst case scenario, you're best off cutting the pot if you really can't get it out, because you don't want to hurt your plant. This one is giving me a hard time today. So I'm going to do just that. I'm going to grab my scissors And I'm actually carefully just going to cut down the side of the pot over here, hope you can see. Okay, and I'm just going to carefully cut a little bit into the pot, and then I'm just going to peel that nursery pot back. Okay, just like that. Alrighty. So, let's see here. We have some very strong root system there. So this one here, he is quite wrapped and bound. Now, some plants you can tase the roots out of. A hellebore, you can't. They don't like being disturbed. So we're going to leave his root structure just as it is. We're not going to tase it. We're not going to bother him. We're just going to leave him alone. The other thing too I wanted to point out is I already filled my pot to about the height of the nursery pot that the hellebore came into. That way it makes it a little easier and you don't have to watch me put dirt in it. I did, however, pre-drill some holes, as you can see on the bottom there, so that there's drainage for this pot, because drainage is important. If we don't have good drainage in a pot, the roots of your plants will rot. And when you have root rot, then your plant will die. So that is always something we want to avoid. So proper drainage is important for that. The other thing is I'm using a really nice soil. It is potting soil. And the reason we're using potting soil over your standard $1 a bag soil for inside of a pot is because the dirt you get to just lay on top of the soil or garden soil, that will get really hard and compacted with time in a pot. And because the plant is in a pot, it needs to have space for its roots. It doesn't get the same conditions as it does when it's in the ground itself. So we have to give it extra nutrition, which potting soil has. I mean, we also have to allow for some aeration to occur because we don't have naturally aerating organisms that live in the soil in our pots. We don't have our worms. We don't have a lot of those tunneling and burrowing animals that will, or creatures that will actually help with aerating and compaction issues. So I have my hellebore in the center. I hope everyone can see that nicely. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take some of my soil, which I have here separately, and I'm going to start placing some of that soil in around the root ball. I'm not going to take it up too high because I still have to plant my heather. So we're just going to set that soil in. Okay. We'll just move that around and spread that out. And I realize it's really hard to see inside this pot, but as you can see, I've kind of placed it around most, and I've gone up about halfway up the height of my hellebore. Reason being, my next set of plants, they're in little 4-inch nursery pots. So they're quite a bit smaller in terms of their depth of the pot. And I need to bring that soil level right up to the very top of this container, because the idea is we want this to look like this once it's all done. So that it has this beautiful structure that's just going to sit right underneath the canopy of our hellebore. So I have the first space done, and I'm going to carefully take this one out of the nursery pot. So this one again, I've taken out of the nursery pot. I am just going to tase up the roots just a little bit, not too much, just a little bit across the bottom. I hope you can see that. So we're just going to try and remove some of that root memory, because as plants grow in a pot, their roots are bound and constricted by the container or vessel that they're in. But once we plant them out, we actually want those roots to spread. We want them to move into the soil and find the water and nutrition and to continue to grow. If the plant roots continue to wrap around the plant, then that will eventually smother and kill our plant. So I've set that in there, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some more soil around our heather. And I'm just going to make sure it's nicely tucked in around there. Now, one of the things I haven't done is I haven't added any fertilizer into the soil. And you might be like, why didn't you put any fertilizer in? Reason being is, like I said, these plants aren't meant to live here into this soil. And because this is fresh potting soil, it's already going to have some extra things and fertilizers added into it. So that should be enough to feed the plants from now until I get them out into the garden. Once I get the plants out into the garden, then I will be adding some fertilizer to help give them a boost. Okay, so we're just tucking that first one in there. Next, we're going to grab the next one. I do have 3 of these. So these plants I did get at the garden center. So often you're going to want to go to a garden center for a good healthy plant. You can also go to a big box store. Walmart will often carry things like heather or plant selection in the spring. This time of the year, it's a little harder to find plants, especially in the big box stores. So your nursery is going to be your best bet for that. So we're just going to tuck that heather in like that. A little more soil back behind it. Okay, just so he sits nicely like that. And then we're going to tuck in the last one that I have. Now my container, I am building it so that it does have a more distinctive back just because of where it is going. I don't need to have anything up against the back. So mine is going to be backed up into the corner near my home. It won't really be viewed from the back. So what is on the back isn't as important. So I only, for cost reasons, got 3 of the heathers, which will go the distance that I need it to. If you do have a container that can be viewed from all sides, by all means, I highly encourage you to add more plants around the back. These aren't going to grow a lot, so even if I had wanted to, I could take a second hellebore and I could actually have added it into the back of this container to give it a thicker, richer look. These aren't going to spread very much. So there's a view of what it would look like with the second one in there. These are not going to spread very much. So the idea of worrying about if you have too many plants in a pot is not something you have to worry about. When you plant things in the landscape, you're going to want to make sure things are spaced out accordingly based on how big they will be. For example, the hellebore will eventually be 2 feet wide. So it will cover this entire span of this pot and a little bit more. So you want to make sure that you have space for the mature size and you're going to plant accordingly. So if I was going to plant another hellebore, I would not plant it naturally in the landscape right up against it like this. I would want to space them so that there is at least 2 feet between the crowns. This will allow for 1 foot of growth on either side so that they are near one another and the canopies will be touching, but they're not going to be smothering one another because everybody needs their personal space, just like we do. So I'm just going to add this last one in, and that will kind of conclude our show for today. So I hope you have learned something and that this was helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments section, and I look forward to our next video. Thank you, and I hope that you have a great day.